what happened in the early 2000s with regard to Greenpeace? What were some of the challenges and reputational issues around that?
As I said to you, that Kimberly-Clark felt that we are an ethical company. We have done most of the stuff right in our past. Because if you go step back to even 1950s, Kimberly-Clark was concerned about availability of wood resources over time. We had then a policy on sustainable use of natural resources, but we were not strict enough to really figure it out where our resources were coming from. In 2004, Greenpeace approached us and shared with us that some of the wood what we are sourcing comes from high growth rainforest area in Canada. Our policy was to meet all the local regulations, and local regulations were Ontario government regulations. And our policy was meeting those regulations, so we didn't think we were doing anything wrong. So our response immediately to the Greenpeace was, this is a noise, we should ignore it, and it will go away.
And let me ask you, how did they approach you? Was this a quiet little approach, or was this a little bit noisier in public?
I think in the beginning they tried to approach my predecessor who was head of sustainability group, but when they didn't get any positive response, in those days, because social media wasn't there, so the standard methods most NGOs were adopting were doing blocking and tackling. And I think when you look at what they did from 2004 to 2007, they were blocking entrances to our factories so that either the raw materials couldn't come in. They were blocking entrances so the employees couldn't come in. They chained themselves to the front gate of one of our facilities so that employees couldn't come in. They went to, every year, as a shareholder, they went to our board of directors meeting and was making noise at the board of directors meeting. They also went to University of Wisconsin where our chairman was giving a presentation, and these guys are almost like college kids. So they changed some of the slides of what our chairman was presenting. So when the chairman's first slide came on, it had a Greenpeace message on it. So they were doing a lot of those tactics, which I call nuisance and irritation to the corporation. Their policies were sound, so board understood those. Board was more concerned in those days from a risk and risk mitigation perspective for the shareholders. And that's what we were discussing most of the times. What are the risks associated with it?
So the reputational risk starts to grow, right? They're not going away. It's been 4 years that Greenpeace was really actively protesting. So first, let's think about, say you were management at Kimberly-Clark, and you're tasked with creating a plan to address these challenges and try and figure out what's the best way to mitigate this reputational risk or change your strategy to respond to Greenpeace. And you say, okay, it's been going on for 4 years, maybe we better respond, look at these rainforest issues. So what would you recommend? And then how would you lobby management to get support for your plan? So let me ask you, if you were in the shoes of upper management, how would you engage the board of directors, and sort of how would you go about getting all the players involved?
In 2002 at Alcoa, we created a board-level committee to focus on risk reputation. And we called it the Public Issues Committee. And the wonderful thing is it focuses management's attention very quickly when a board has oversight responsibility for it. Then we got into the idea of every 6 months, every 6 times a year, management would have to report to the board on issues that are critical to the company's reputation. Mm-hmm. So it started thinking about it and then creating a structure around it so that you could report these things.
At any point in this process, you brought in third parties like certification councils, I can't recall the name of the forest sort of, yeah.
Right. So that's another strategy, right? Is to bring in, and why is that a good strategy in addition to creating this sort of internal committee to bring in a third party? Do you want to elaborate on that?
Because essentially you are diffusing the sort of tit for tat thing that's going on between you and Greenpeace. You have another third party whose business is to, in essence, not mediate, but to sort of state what they see as the facts of the case.
And so what you're also sort of arguing towards is to engage directly, right? To engage directly with Greenpeace, not to just sort of create a committee over here and say, look, we're addressing the problem publicly, but then also to directly engage with the NGO.
I think all of you had wonderful points, and I think we took probably, in essence, parts of each one of the stuff what you talked about. I shared with you what happened. From a board perspective, we have an audit committee where every quarter anything which has risk associated and mitigation plans are shared with the board on a quarterly basis. And on an annual basis, we do an enterprise risk map to the board. But since, as I told you, the financial impact of this was very, very small, this thing really never materialized up to the level that it was a high bubble on that chart. Second stuff, Greenpeace campaign started very high with blocking and tackling in 2004 and 5, but it started to die in 2006 and 7, and it was only at few universities where they were campaigning. So it was on and off, it wasn't really concentrated after 2007. So combination of all that stuff, what business management decided that we had to look at this from a different perspective, and we decided to appoint somebody who has a business background to tackle this problem instead of those who were involved, who were subject matter experts. Okay, the previous people who were involved were subject matter experts, but they had scars on their body from previous negotiations. So we brought in somebody completely different who has a business background to solve this problem. And that individual, one person, and there's one person from Greenpeace worked together to come up with a framework of how we can further improve our policy going forward. And that's what we agreed with them in 2009. To your point about Greenpeace becoming partners, I think I share with you what Greenpeace gentleman Scott Paul always reminds me, that in their mind, they're never permanent friends and they're never permanent enemies. Okay? So I can tell you they keep us on our toes all the times. There's no easy sleeping times working with NGOs.